This episode of the EV Resource Podcast is brought to you by Oasis Charging, offering commercial and residential customers comprehensive EV charging solutions with a consultative approach. For more information and to schedule a free consultation, go to oasischarging.com. Coming up this week.
So the question is how long does it actually take me to charge my vehicle? It's literally seconds. Get out of my car, I plug in the charger, and it's never empty. I never think about it. That type of benefit is something that you can only get by putting L2 chargers where the cars dwell.
Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 201 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. And this week I have Jeffrey Kinsey, VP of Engineering for EverCharge, and we're going to talk about primarily level 2 charging, get into some fleet stuff, talk about the consumer side of things, and then ultimately where we can expect the industry to go and why level 2 charging really is the future of EV charging. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I know we're going to have a great conversation. I'd like, before we dive into everything, to give my guests an opportunity to share a little bit of their background. That way the audience knows exactly who they're listening and watching, or listening to and watching. So
yeah, sure.
If you could speak to your origin story and kind of share a little bit about what brought you to your current role.
I'll start at the most recent. So I've been in EV charging now for about 4 years. I came here because I wanted to do something that had a large impact. I think in tech, it's easy to find things that you think have large impacts, but every once in a while something comes up, you're like, wow, that's going to have a very dramatic shift on how we live our life. And EVs, it's just hard to ignore the shift that we're going to have because of them. So yeah, I ended up here because I'm like, okay, I'm old enough now. I want something that's going to have a big impact, like kind of a legacy. But I've been doing this for quite a while now. I'm feeling like an old man. I roll back and say yeah, I started coding when I was 12. Have gone through some pretty major tech companies, done some pretty major things. But I ended up here primarily because of the impact that I think I can have on humanity and the transportation industry and the planet in general.
As a part of the role that you have with EverCharge, what is your focus?
So as a VP of engineering in my current role, I do a lot of stuff that involves a lot of stuff for product requirements. I say the industry is kind of fun to work in because it's still evolving. And so there's this you don't have to build it yet. You have to essentially sell someone on the concept that it's coming. And I think people really appreciate that. We have a thing that floats around here. We call it a 10% rule, that 10% of the efforts get you 90% of your results. And it's super valuable right now. You see a lot of the other tech companies talking about the fact that, they have to be more efficient and leaner. Engineering is one of those disciplines that doesn't scale very well. So if you can really boil what the customer needs down into the MVP, the minimum viable product, not only do you, one, have customers that are happy, but two, you have something that is sustainable, that you can actually keep running on a normal basis in a cost-effective way. So a lot of my time I'm spending working with customers directly, understanding what they need, and then trying to boil it down into something that is simpler, that is easy, that is elegant. So a lot of my time is spent doing that. I spend a lot of time with customers as a VP of engineering, shockingly, but once again, a lot of companies like to say that they are customer focused, but I feel kind of blessed with where I am right now that we can actually be customer focused because they're just talking to us. They tell us what they need, and they give us time to go build it. EVSE product development, or just EVs in general, the times are so long to do an installation. So you talk about some of these. I know we're supposed to go into L2 at some point, but even on the DCs, you're talking utility upgrades can be a year or two. Mm-hmm. And so that's a long time for an engineering team to go tweak or deliver new features by the time the site is going to be installed. So there's a little bit of secrets if you're the engineering company building new products, that you can have it done before the customer actually needs it. just in time engineering.
Right. Yeah, it's it's amazing how you could start a project with one type of equipment, maybe some of the features that are available, and then by the time maybe a year and a half, 2 years later that you're ready to actually install and commission, you might be working with something that has more features than you originally intended.
Yeah, for sure. Like we've done I say we're fairly unique in the industry because we do hardware and software. We're full stack on that. Hardware's hard, but we have turned around, like you said, we have turned around hardware in like low months. So when a customer needs something that like is a little bit different from other places, specifically the integration into their operations, like how you mount the EVSE into their location. Yeah, the hardware that you end up installing was not the hardware you started with. Uh, but it does mean that you know I say I personally have a mission. Like I'm here to accelerate the adoption of EVs. And there's no better way of doing that by figuring out how to integrate into existing operations.
Yeah.
If people don't have to change the way that they work and to integrate an EV, it just eliminates that barrier. There's no reason for them not to do that.
So right there is the transition into the majority of the conversation. You totally set that up where people should charge where their vehicles sit for the majority of the time. So 90% of the time for consumers, you're talking about at home and at work. That's where they need to be able to charge one or the other or both. Fleets, and I do want to start with fleets and kind of work through that because that is slightly different, where in many ways, I would say almost easier to plan EV charging around because most fleets have set routes that their delivery vehicles or whatever they happen to be working with are running. But there's also a general cadence to the amount of miles that they typically are going to go on an average day. So you don't have to prepare for such a wide range of variability with the vehicle or with the type of, I guess, use cases that might be required to account for the charging aspect.
Yeah, you see like this the range anxiety fear that consumers have. Because it is wildly variable what I'm going to do on a normal basis. Although, like, I think most consumers aren't going on 300-mile road trips on a normal basis either. But some of the more mature fleets, I mean, there's been telemetry systems that have existed for like decades now. They know exactly how far each vehicle is going. They know the variability. They can do averages. They can do standard deviations. Like they know exactly what that truck is going to do.
Yep.
Yeah, so like the concept of having range anxiety, you're right, just kind of disappears. It goes from a general unknown to like a very specific known.
As commercial fleets tend to adopt electric transportation as well, and things are certainly trending in that direction, what are some key strategies that customers can employ that ensure reliable charging, but also as maybe they're not transitioning the entire fleet all at once? So something that is scalable that can grow along with their vehicle and charging needs.
Yeah, there's a well, you tapped on two things there. I might end up talking for a little while here. Uh, let me just talk about there's a concept I call it the nominal charge. There's this concept that uh, the vehicles rarely come back empty. Even in a fleet setting, I think like I was kind of taken back, but jumping around a little bit, like I was kind of taken back when the 40 Transit came out. You're like, man, it's got a really small battery on it, and still they're not using that full battery on most cases, right? The fleets, the routes are even smaller than that. But in general, like these vehicles aren't using their full battery. So if you essentially design a system, assuming the worst case scenario of every single vehicle in your fleet is going from empty to full, that's not going to be the case. And you will have wildly overbuilt your infrastructure. So to your first thing, you talked about like the how do you scale some of this? I think what we're going to see, especially early on, as a fleet transitions into EVs, they start to have a little bit of the range anxiety, and they like go put in too much power for what they actually need. Then they go run their telematics, and they're like, oh well, now after doing this for 6 months or a year, I'm using far less energy than I thought I was. Great. Now why don't I go use that energy with more charging stations as I expand my fleet? And so the concept, I know we'll probably get into this a lot later on, but the concept of load balancing to essentially uh, use excess power across more vehicles pops up as you are expanding, so that like yeah, if you're using less power, if that vehicle is only charging for 2 hours and sitting there for 10, use the next 10 hours of energy somewhere else.
Yeah.
I want to double click for a second on reliability. That's a super interesting one in the EV industry right now, and like unfortunately, I don't think there's a silver bullet on this. EV charging, and I spend a lot of time in consumer electronics. I was in the Xbox division. I did AR glasses. I did some other consumer electronic laptops and stuff like that. Uh, EV charging is by far one of the hardest environments for electronics. Uh, you put it out in super hot environments, super cold environments. It's exposed to sprinklers, to rain, to hurricanes, to tornadoes, to lightning strikes, to dust, to leaf blowers, to pressure washers, to chemicals. Like the list just goes on and on.
And worse, humans.
And humans, yes. uh, uh, so it's a super hard environment, and it does mean that I don't think there's a silver bullet to reliability. It is just something that you are out there, like proactively fixing, proactively correcting. You know, like I feel like we're also callous to like how good, like say, like a gas pump is. Uh, those are highly maintained. They're highly reliable. Like they're all covered. Like there's a lot of things that we take for granted and high availability that like isn't easy. It just means that there's someone there that's going to fix it on a normal basis. I think there's things that can be done from a site design that can increase your reliability, but I don't know of like a silver bullet that just says if you do something, all of your reliability issues disappear. And he brought up humans. Yeah, I'm surprised at the amount of times we see tire marks on our charging cables and charging guns. Uh, like it's just something that's so like I probably shouldn't be running over equipment. Like you wouldn't do that at a gas pump, run over the gas pump. I think we're all a little scared of what happens when you light gas on fire. But there doesn't seem to be the same concern with running over an extension cord.
Right.
And I think a lot of people think that an EV charger is an extension cord and it should be more considered a welding cord. So whoever has done arc welding, you'd be like, do you really want that voltage loose on you? The answer is no.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, reliability is just a thing that fleets they have to be proactive about.
When you look at fleets in general, there's a lot of things that conclusions that can be drawn to apply charging kind of across the board. But then when you get like down really specifically, where even to a site by site basis, I mean, having enough space in the yard, if you will, where maybe you have to give up a few parking spaces in order to account for the extra equipment, whether it be switch gear or supporting transformer or so on and so forth. So it's like all of that, but then yeah, if you don't have proper cable management, running over cables is, I mean, that's the last thing a customer would want to do if through whatever agreement they had, they're responsible for covering costs for cable replacement. I mean, they're not like ridiculously expensive like the cost of the charger, but they're not like can't go out to Walmart and
They're not
buy
cheap.
replace a cable. Like they're a couple $100 to, I guess, with the fast charging, a couple $1,000 for cables. Those things definitely, when laying out a site, designing the site, you have to kind of like fast forward and think about how it's going to be used, and in many ways, prepare for the worst.
Yeah, I wish they could say that customers will be willing to give up a few parking spots. That has not been the case. Like
No.
we frequently have to work in the third dimension, either go up or down.
Right.
I say one of the hardest environments are loading docks because you talk about like the vehicle just isn't parked for being done at the end of the day. The vehicle is being parked where it's going to be loaded.
Right.
And so those facilities are highly customized, space is minimized already,
Mm.
and then you got to fit charging into it. And typically, the only answer is to go up or down.
Sure.
And we do both based on what's available. Because once again, this isn't a one size. Every site can be a little bit unique. Uh, I think one of the it's really I'd say it's easier to come up with a solution, like you said, to like really tidy things up and get everything out of the way when there's like a standard vehicle that everyone is using. And I know there's a lot of OEMs out there like vying for the position of winning in this market. They haven't all agreed on where charging ports go.
Right.
And then as a charging vendor, that makes our life, especially on the installation side, that makes our life even more complicated. Like sometimes they'll be on the back, sometimes they'll be on the left side, sometimes they'll be on the right side, sometimes they'll be out front. Then you have it's once again it's really easy when it's all in one location. Then you can have a very customized solution for that. When you have multiple locations, it gets way more complicated to have a highly functional, highly reliable, out of the way, cost effective charging distribution system for them.
Mm. I absolutely love where this conversation is going. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back at it.
Do you own a business and want to reach EV owners and people interested in electric vehicles? EV Resource is welcoming businesses nationwide, both big and small, to become advertising partners with us across all platforms. For more information, please email Zach at hello@ev-resource.com.
Hey, everybody. I just want to thank you real quick for watching, listening to, and supporting the show. Your support is what keeps this podcast going. To get all of the URLs, codes, deals, and discounts from our partners, you can go to ev-resource.com/deals. So please consider supporting those who support us. Are there any emerging technologies in the EV charging space that might make all of this a lot easier or simplify the way charging's approached? And one thing that comes to mind would be uh, wireless charging, where instead of worrying about where the charge port is and how you have to plug things in or even running over cables, well, with wireless charging, you simply, ideally, park the vehicle on a pad over top of where the charging hardware would be, and you charge. Is
Yeah.
that even remotely close to being possible?
So I'm not a physicist. I know there's a lot of challenges that the wireless folks are doing, and like I don't want to throw shade on anything that a bunch of research groups are out there doing, but in general, I know there's a substantial amount of losses that can happen on wireless charging. When you start talking about, I mean, fleets like number one, number two, fueling and employees. I forget which way it goes, but the efficiency of the onboard charger, the efficiencies on a DC system of the inverters, like these things start to really matter when you talk about a huge fleet.
Sure.
And so like the efficiencies of the wireless charging, I don't believe are near what a wire is, just in terms of the resistance. Uh, I'd say the like I'm a charging company, or I work at a charging company. We're kind of the tail on the dog, so to speak, right? Like, uh,
Sure.
if OEMs start getting really bored on wireless charging, then the charging companies will definitely follow suit, and that hasn't happened yet.
Right.
Uh, so I'm assuming that that hasn't yet been a viable solution that the car OEMs have figured out yet.
Well, and that transition is even more challenging, I would imagine, than just transitioning from diesel or gasoline to electric, because now you have to have uh, that actual hardware right underneath the vehicle. And of course, that's not exactly a very friendly environment. So whatever is created would definitely have to be fairly robust to withstand road debris. And I mean, some of the things that we were talking about for the chargers, it would have to be there for the vehicles as well.
Yep. Yeah,
Um,
we do everything we can to keep the anything charging related out of any area that someone might drive.
right.
Because it's assumed that your drivers are, I mean, they're not bad people, but like, like humans make mistakes, right? Like you said, like humans make mistakes. Uh, so yeah, the intricacies of essentially burying stuff, not only the construction costs of it, like you talk about the cost of a DC cable being fairly expensive. A DC cable running underground to a wireless charging pad with all the protections would probably be fairly cost ineffective as well. Uh, like once again, like it's not something that uh, it's something that we have to see the vehicle OEMs like take on before I think the rest of us can even consider it.
Sure. Yeah. Admittedly, that's something that I easily get excited about the prospect of it, but apparently not enough to like really do some serious research and try to figure out exactly like who's leading that space and what exactly is going on where um maybe I need to put that on my to-do list of some research because
Well, going back to my previous thing of the 10% of your efforts get you 90% of your results. Like you look at the benefits that you get by moving to EVs, and then what you would get by moving, like trying to optimize like a post cable. And I can tell you that like when you get to the point of having a standardized vehicle, like if you have a fleet and you have a standardized vehicle, and then the charging system is specifically designed and installed at the dwell location for that vehicle, the charging cable doesn't become that large of an issue anymore.
right.
We have a fleet that has a fairly standard location for their vehicle. Like we don't even need retractions anymore. The cable length is customized. Like it literally is right where the vehicle is going to park. Like charging disappears so fast. Like the effort of essentially like plugging your vehicle in disappears so fast and is so seamless. That going beyond that, like we already got 95% of the results.
Yeah, so it almost is one of those things where well why would we try to uh get that last little bit because the effort required to get there is would be just be astronomical in terms of time and probably money as well. Um, when looking at an overall site, and you had hinted at load balancing and the ability for sharing the available power across multiple vehicles. That makes a lot of sense naturally, as vehicles are not going to be at the same state of charge, so they're going to be asking for different power coming from chargers. With DC fast chargers, I know a lot of equipment suppliers and manufacturers are starting to put load balancing into what they're offering. But we want to talk about level two. So I'm curious, what what have you seen in terms of level two being able to load balance not just within a charger itself and the two or sometimes more connectors coming off of that, but perhaps across an entire bank of chargers that is in an entire site.
Yeah, I'm gonna nerd out for just a second here.
Awesome. Let's do
I
it.
I feel like people don't think about the fourth dimension enough when they think of charging, right? Like the time aspect of it. Uh, so I feel like people talk a lot about the power, but not the energy of what the site is going to deliver. So I have like I actually did a bunch of math beforehand to prepare for a question of this type coming. Like if you have say like a 1200 amp site, and nominally 40 amps going to each charger, you would say, well, that means I can only get 30 chargers. 1200 divided by
Okay.
40
Yeah.
equals 30. Uh,
But
so you're like, okay, I can do 30 chargers. Well, that means that let's say your dwell time is 12 hours. Here comes the fourth dimension. If your dwell time, your vehicles are parked there for 12 hours, that means that each one of those cars at 208 volts is getting about 100 or so uh, kilowatt hours of power or of energy. Excuse me.
yes.
Like rarely does a vehicle need 100 kilowatt hours of energy.
Yep.
And so instead, if you look at the problem not from a power perspective, but from an energy perspective, so going back to that 1200 amps, if I have 1200 amps over 12 hours, I'm sitting on about 3 MWh of power. Now you say, how many vehicles can I fill with that 3 MWh? And so, like, if even if you said worst case scenario, once again, I'll go back to Ford Transit, right? It's got a 68 kilowatt hour battery in it. Like you say, 3 MWh divided by 68 kilowatt hours. I don't exactly know what the math is, but it's more than 30, the original number.
Yeah.
And just to make it an easy number, if the vehicles were only 50 kilowatts empty each night, which is still quite a bit for that vehicle,
Sure.
you could put in twice as many chargers.
Yep.
You could have put in 60 chargers rather than 30. And so the concept of yeah, like on the L2s, like there are in a population in a heterogeneous population, you might have some vehicles. I have a Chevy Bolt that charges at 32 amps. Like if the charger can do 48, yeah, you might as well send that somewhere else.
Right.
But in a fleet scenario, it's when the vehicle becomes full that you want to transition that energy to some other vehicle. Now, I think one of the things that I say a lot of fleets aren't thinking about is they say, well, I'll install those 30 chargers, but then I'll just have people move around the vehicles. I have a human to do that already.
Oh, no.
I see you shaking your head there, like that. Like that can be the right answer sometimes, but if you run the math on it, how much it costs you to employ someone,
Mhm.
and then the other thing, like it takes time to move a vehicle around. You got 30 vehicles charging. If you hire one person to move them all around, like you're talking hours for that person to switch them all out. And so then you just have to do the calculations of, do I have a human move all these cars, or do I have the chargers just do it by themselves?
Yep.
And then instead of looking at the utilization on a charger specific case, you look at it. What's my utilization of my energy coming into the building? If you get close to 100% on that one, you're solid, even if the EVSEs are using less.
So I want to dive into this a little bit further, believe it or not, where there's two ways that this could effectively be done with the chargers only. One would be kind of a passive approach where a vehicle is pulling a steady current and then it fills up or charges to wherever level is it's set to, and then it stops, and now that power is available for something else, like through a smart switch or splitter or some situation like that. But from the way you're speaking, it sounds like that's not what we're talking about. That what we're explaining is a little bit more dynamic. And so I want to explore that and explain a little bit more in depth about how that actually works. Like, what are the nuts and bolts? Is it uh, hardware, or is it primarily software that's coordinating the overall effort for the site?
Well, let me talk about a little bit like how we got here and the customer problems that popped out.
Yeah.
So originally, like say like 10 years ago, you had a very big difference between the vehicles' charging speeds. And I forget now like what the Nissan Leaf was, but Chevy Bolt 2016 timeframe, 32 amps. Uh, Even like the Nissan Leaf, they used to like overheat because they were air cooled batteries,
Mhm.
which the charger would be like, okay, I need to stop for a while as this car air cools, and I might as well send the power somewhere else. So that's kind of how like the industry got here. But now that we're here in fleet specifically, you might have larger batteries and they're all liquid cooled now, but they have auxiliary loads now that are exterior to the transportation of the car. Like the easiest one to pick on is they might be running preconditioning on their batteries. Just like they come and plug in, they're going to precondition. They might be doing preconditioning at the end of the battery. They might be doing preconditioning for the cabin before the vehicle is leaving in the morning. And so once again, you end up with a situation that you have very asymmetrical loads. So like as a vehicle is charging, it's asking for the full 48 or 80 amps. But before or afterward, it might be asking for something way different, 10 amps or 8 amps or 12 amps, something like that. So the there is the hardware essentially is part of the J1772 spec for the car to ask or the EVSE to say this is the power you're going to get, and it's up to them to use what they want. But then the rest of it of moving the energy around inside of the system, that's all software. Now, like I like to say, we have some secret sauce in this area. One thing that we've done on that is that this becomes part of your line of business, like the charging itself, or even this behavior of essentially how energy gets moved around inside of the building becomes part of your line of business. That has to work. So, going back to the other scenario, if I actually put 60 EVSEs on a 1200 amp circuit, I'm expecting the system to essentially like move energy around between my 60 vehicles. If that doesn't work, you have a problem. Uh, and
Very
so
true.
there does end up being extra hardware, at least for us, where we are eliminating single points of failure inside of that communication network on site, so that that can continue even when a vehicle drives into one of our chargers, or like if you think of other single points of failure in communication, I don't know, like an access point goes down or an Ethernet switch gets broken. And so, like, I think to do this reliably, like you can do it somewhat unreliably, like with just software, but to do it reliably, you have to include that extra hardware to make sure that you don't have a single point of failure as you're doing your load balancing. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that, uh, like in a world that's so reliant on cloud, and like we kind of take it for granted that AWS is around, and like that everywhere we go we have connectivity with our cell phones. Uh, that still isn't good enough for line of business applications. So you know, not to pick on any specific vendor, but you can go look up and see when cell outages have happened. You can go look to see when major cloud providers have had outages. And so part of making this a reliable system, if the business is depending on this behavior of moving energy around, that has to run on site. That has to be something that is on premise, which is wild in computer science to think, we used to do everything on site. We had server rooms,
Right.
and then we moved everything off site into the cloud. And for EV charging, like it has to be somewhat of a hybrid model where all of the real-time information, all the real-time decisions, all of that's happening on site. Configuration, reporting, commissioning, all that stuff can go off site.
Yes.
But the runtime stuff has to be dead reliable on site.
So I'm going to throw a wrench into the mix, and this is perhaps talking about some of um, the forward thinking aspects of EV charging, and and that might actually be a wrong thing to say. So what I'm getting at is bidirectional charging, where now you're throwing a completely new element into the mix, and one of the I guess most easily identifiable applications that I'm aware of would be actually with school buses and the ability to charge them naturally, but then during the summer, being able to use the batteries to help with grid load demand. I know here in Virginia, where I am, Dominion Energy, who's the utility, a large part of their promotion of school buses and electric fleets um, comes down to being able to use the battery when the vehicle is, in its off season, if you will.
Yeah, I feel like when I got into this industry, like I learned a bunch of stuff that was just like things that make you go, hmm. Like there's those peaker gas plants,
Yeah.
that nobody wants to run. Like you're talking generation of energy generation on, like, say, industrial solar, which is just wildly cheap these days, is like a couple cents a kilowatt hour. And when you run a peaker gas plant, you're up at like the $5 a kilowatt hour.
Right.
And then you look at some of the things that's happened in Texas during their major outages, and you're like, it's, I don't know, a couple $100,000 a kilowatt hour. So like there's this concept that the grid doesn't need like long-term storage. They need these like just little, like just enough to kick it over until they can fire up a bigger plant, or like till a load shifts.
Mhm.
Yeah, like the buses seem like that hero story where you have this wildly expensive battery sitting there. I say like I have a hard time seeing that with a lot of other fleets because a lot of other fleets are just using their vehicles on a daily basis. So it's a lot harder for them to say, uh, can I dedicate, or do I not, am I not going to run my business tomorrow because my power grid needed extra power? I think there is some of those energy costs that have happened during the outage, the virtual power plants, like those energy rates are high enough that someone might be like, yeah, like it's more cost effective for me. I will make more money today using
Right.
my vehicle's batteries to essentially bridge the load of the power company than I will by doing my normal business, which is kind of a wild thing to think about. That you never
Yeah.
had any of this with ICE vehicles. So there is this new opportunity that didn't exist before.
Well, and with gasoline or propane or some fuel that needs to be burned, that role was on-site generators. Where if the electricity went out from your grid source, then backup power kicked on. Where I almost can see the opportunity for like ambulances when they're at the hospital, and maybe we could pull energy off the ambulance battery if the power goes out to support some of the systems. That lots of probably edge cases in terms of application.
I think
Yeah.
the big thing that's going to transition on that, like the, I don't know if I'm saying this right, the nickel, manganese, cobalt batteries, they had about 1,000 cycles to them. Uh, so like if you're saying I'm dedicating that energy to driving, like that's a long ways they're going to drive. But if you say like I'm going to respond to demand events on a power grid, like all of a sudden you go through those cycles pretty fast.
Mhm.
Like I'm excited to see like like the lithium ion, the lithium iron,
Mhm.
and some of the maybe some of the more esoteric batteries like the sodium and stuff coming,
Yeah.
where you have just a lot longer cycles or a lot more cycles. Then some of those scenarios where like, yeah, I've got energy in this battery. What else can I use it for? It becomes a lot more palatable.
Right.
Like if you have a large, let's say a large fleet vehicle, like say class 6, that might be rolling with a 240 kilowatt hour battery. That's a majority of the cost of that vehicle.
Oh yeah.
So saying that like the math might work out if the power company or someone else is willing to pay a lot of money for that energy, the math might work out. But in general, like it's hard to say I'm going to deprecate or depreciate the largest asset in my vehicle any faster than I'm doing already with my fleet. But like
Sure.
I'm excited about where the future is because yeah, when either there's a new chemistry or they solve some of the like cycle life problems with batteries, a whole bunch of these new scenarios become economically viable.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think one of the first things that you said when we started this conversation was that this industry is still very young. Things are changing all of the time. There's new technology, new even down to battery chemistries that affect the EV charging side of things, that affect vehicle choice and cost. Like it's so involved and dynamic across a very large spectrum in ways that with traditional diesel or gas vehicles, we didn't really see them kind of being implemented and affected in so many different ways. So it is very exciting, but also you could ask me what do things look like 10 years from now, and I've got a couple guesses, but I don't think anybody really actually knows what to expect from this industry.
Yeah, like the typical engineering thing we use a lot is the crawl, walk, run, right? Like we're kind of that crawling right now with the industry to say, yeah, let's just get EV vehicles out there and make them reliably. Uh, and then like the run on that could be, yeah, and then I'm using them for once I have that, once that's just been well established that like I can do that, then we start talking about these more esoteric things of, and now I'm going to use them to power my business when they go down. Or like some fleet might, like you said, like some fleet might drive to the local hospital and use their fleet to power the local hospital when power goes out. That's just not an opportunity we have right now.
Right.
Uh, But yeah, once everything else has becomes the stable platform for everyone to build on, then yeah, there's a lot more opportunity to do crazy stuff. Like I'd like to you talk about like the innovation in this industry. Like yeah, like we've been doing gas and diesel for like over 100 years now. Like it's kind of peaked out a little bit, right? And you look at the effort, the brain power, the engineering that's going into electric vehicles, the charging, the grid. There's just a lot of stuff there. We're going to come up with really cool ideas just because it's a new format. There's new benefits that we didn't have before.
Yeah, and electric vehicles provide opportunities for or new opportunities for traditional or even alternative fuels where I know a couple of examples where propane or natural gas is used to power EV charging when the power capacity might not be at a particular location, or from a cost perspective, it makes more sense to power an EV charger to charge the vehicle using some of these, I guess, a slightly less carbon friendly fuels. But even then, it's still better.
Yeah,
So, EV charging at its core is the catalyst for that.
yeah. Well, uh, you talk about the transformation. I'm pretty lucky myself. I put in solar panels. Well, putting them in was still good,
Yeah.
and so I get that like really peak benefit of how cheap it is for me to drive. Because I charge at my house, how cheap it is for me to drive. Like with my Chevy Bolt, for me to go 100 miles is about $1. Like it's just like wildly cheap. Uh, and that's going to be true. That will become available to a lot of other people. You
Sure.
talked at the very beginning. You talk about the need for workplace charging, or even like at home. Like a lot of us are working from home still. Like when that sun is out, like that is producing very cheap energy.
Mhm.
Instead of trying to transition like or store that energy to some later time, just figuring out how to get cars plugged in during that time, so using that cheap energy makes a big difference.
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, like you could see like even like the way the power grid is put together will be influenced by how charging ends up.
I think we will see uh, transmission be less important because access to power generation, whether that be from storage like batteries in vehicles or solar on rooftop or any other, I mean, there's so many different ways, it'll be more distributed. And so we won't have some of the issues like you had mentioned, Texas, where costs went ridiculously high. Well, one of the variables that is so challenging with ERCOT is transmission of electricity. With the renewables are out in West Texas with all the wind and solar primarily, but getting that to where the people are, that's a challenge. But if you had distributed solutions, whether that be solar, whether that be using electric vehicles to uh, incentivize owners or fleet owners to allow their batteries to be used to offset some of the peak demand. I mean, it almost seems like there's so many solutions for a wide array of applications right there at our fingertips.
I,
But
I,
I want to, if we can, before we end, touch on why level two is the future and why DC fast charging, while it has its place and it's an important piece of the larger puzzle, L2 really is the answer. So simply, I'm going to ask you, why is that something that would somebody would believe? Why is that the case?
so we'll start with the number one thing for everyone is cost. Like as green as everyone wants to be, like it comes down to like cold hard cash. uh and the delivery of energy on L2 watt for watt is just cheaper than doing DC. Uh, it's just a cheaper way. It's a I shouldn't say cheaper, more cost effective way. But there's a lot of other like kind of benefits that pop out of that as well. Uh, it charges slower, which puts less demand on a whole bunch of systems. Uh, it talk about reliability of an L2 charger versus DC. DC requires far more maintenance, both preventative and corrective maintenance, than an L2 charger does. It's fundamentally just far simpler of a technology, right?
Sure.
And not to mention the concept. If you really truly want to absorb the benefits of what EVs bring you, uh, the making the charging disappear means that I'm charging where I live. I'm charging where my car is parked. And it doesn't make sense from a cost perspective to do that with DC. L2, it just makes a lot of sense. And I think that for those who haven't transitioned over to from ICE to EV, like I've probably used public charging twice since I've owned my EV. So the question is, like, how long does it actually take me to charge my vehicle? It's literally seconds. Like, get out of my car, I plug in the charger, and it's never empty. I never think about it. Uh, that type of benefit is something that you can only get by putting L2 chargers where the cars dwell.
Mhm.
So the it's a cost-effective solution. It's a highly reliable solution. It's a distributable solution, and it's a solution that gives people the best experience of charging. Means that L2 is the future. That doesn't. I mean, there are definitely scenarios where you need DC. Like, they
Sure.
exist, right? Like, uh, like, pick on yard tractors right now, like Long Beach. Those trucks that are moving the containers around. They're working 24/7.
Right.
Like, they can't transition without having very fast DC.
Mhm.
Driving down a freeway, you need very fast DC. But, like, if I had to go on a road trip, which I'm hoping to do in a couple hours here, like, uh, would I prefer to have to stop at a DC station to fill up, or I would prefer my hotel to have a L2 charger? I much prefer to my hotel to have one.
Yes.
Once again, my fueling disappears. All of a sudden, as an EV driver, I get a benefit that you don't get with ICE. I can't fill up my gas car at a hotel.
Right.
Like, I drive in my hotel, I go to the pool, I hang out at the bar, I go to sleep, I wake up the next morning, and I'm fueled up. Like, I don't have to think about, like, I'm going to go stop at a restaurant next to a gas station in the morning, right?
Right.
It becomes a far better experience.
I have been on trips where I was able to charge overnight at the hotel, and I've been on trips where I was not. And it's a night and day difference where, to your point, you don't have to even think about it. You just know when you wake up, you've got what you need.
Yeah, and like I feel like there's not. I mean, I'm glad we're talking about it here, but there's definitely in the normal, like, conversations about EVs versus gas vehicles. Like, there is definitely, yeah, it takes you longer to fill up at a DC charging station. Hopefully, you never will. Like, hopefully that's so minimal that you just don't think about it. For every other time, like, I still have a gas vehicle, I have an EV vehicle. Like, it pains me every single time I have to go to the gas station now because I don't have to do it with my EV. And be like, man, like, someday here soon, I won't have this other gas vehicle. I'll get rid of that, upgrade to an EV, and I will never leave my house with an empty fuel tank, so to speak.
Right.
That's a
Right.
huge advantage.
So, Jeffrey, I want to kind of tie things up here. What would you say for the audience, which, even though we've talked about fleets quite a bit, the majority of the audience is more on the consumer side of things. But what would you say is the biggest takeaway from our conversation that they can take and either share with others or maybe apply to their own particular situation?
So we didn't quite tap on this, but I actually did want to. I did want to get to this.
Yeah.
There is a benefit to everyone when fleets electrify. And EverCharge does do other things. We do MUD condos, like that type of stuff. But just to say, like, we did talk about fleets a lot. There is a huge benefit to everyone when fleets electrify, because those vehicles are still traveling through your neighborhoods. And so the concept that not everyone right now will or should buy an EV, like, yeah, that's probably true still. Like, it's, if you're hauling a trailer, like, it can be tough to essentially do that with an EV right now. Uh, but if you're buying packages or putting trash out in your curb, the fact that those vehicles will eventually not be polluting your neighborhood with diesel fumes means that's a benefit that everyone gets. And I went and looked it up before this podcast, and I couldn't find hard numbers, but I found them a few years ago. During the pandemic, especially in my county, in San Mateo County, there was a study. During the pandemic, when everyone quit driving, the hospitalizations for asthma went down.
Oh, yeah.
And we all know that like it's not good to breathe exhaust fumes. Like, we'll probably look back 100 years from now and be like, I mean, we look back now and be like, that was crazy. They used to burn lead gas, right? Like, we'll probably look back 50, 100 years from now and be like, that was crazy that we burned gas. Like, that was toxic. We don't really know what the health gains will have. But to answer your question, what does everyone take away from this? That especially even on the fleet side, if you're not going to go buy an EV, like, okay, but if you encourage the people that are driving through your neighborhood with highly polluting vehicles to transition to EVs, we all benefit. Everyone they drive by benefits. So like there's this, it's one of the things that gets me super excited about where I am right now, what I'm doing, is that I will have, if I am successful, I will have a huge impact on a lot of communities around the country, even though I am not directly selling them on driving an EV.
So normally I ask my guests two questions to end. One is, what do you drive? Well, you've mentioned that. And what drives you? I think you've mentioned that as well. So instead, because we've ruined my questions,
Sorry about that.
no, that's it's good because it gives an opportunity to ask a new question. And this I think it might be tough to answer, but at one point early on, you had said that you are very mission driven to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles, which is very much a shared mission by many, many people in the industry, myself included. But you just mentioned, and maybe this is just what you happen to say, but you said if you are successful. So what I want to ask is if the mission is accelerating the transition to electric vehicles, what is success? Is that a specific point that we're trying to reach? Or is it about the journey of getting there, accelerating that transition?
It's interesting you bring that up. I mean, I can't talk about specific customers, but I can tell you that like we've had situations where we have had to do very custom solutions because they couldn't figure out how to deploy charging without it or how to go to EVs without it.
Sure.
So part of that journey is like there's not everything I can do to accelerate people, but I can definitely get roadblocks out of their way. Don't give them a reason to say no. Like it's kind of universal now that they say, hey, the real problem now with EVs in general is charging. And so the more that I get rid of the reasons for people to say no to charging, like or the barriers in the way of charging, that's gonna make everyone just have one less reason to say no. I'd say like you asked about the long term. Yeah, like the long term, like no matter what you think about like say global warming, I think it's easy to align the fact that like I just don't want to be breathing dirty stuff. Like the air gets cleaner just by not doing that. Like, I live in the Bay Area. Some of the hills around here, you go up and like every once in a while you get a clear day and you're like, wow, like there are mountains on the other side of the Bay Area. Like I don't see those very often, right? Like
Right.
what if that was every day? So long term, like this concept that like we will get back to the cleanliness that the world hasn't seen in a long time, and that we will just be healthier people because of it. And what does that look like? Yeah, that looks like a majority of our vehicles are EV. I like there's another hero story I actually heard come out of ACT this year, which is there's like I never heard it before that they started talking about it. There's this tangible benefit for even the employees who are driving these things.
Yeah.
And like driving an EV, driving an EV, like my Chevy Bolt. Now I've rented like other gas cars on a couple of vacations I had recently. Like an EV, like there's instantaneous torque. So like you're at a stop sign, you have to go across a couple roads. it's just there. You're across the roads in no time. Even with something as low end as a Chevy Bolt, that's an entry level car. It accelerates really fast. Or the other thing, you're on a freeway, and a lot of vehicles these days, the ICE vehicles, they got to be up in sixth, seventh, eighth gear to essentially get their efficiency up. When you step on it, they got to downshift multiple times before they'll start going. An electric car, you just punch it and you're gone. And I don't say it's a safety thing, but it feels a lot more comforting when you're in a car that when you have an input, it reacts. It's just a nicer way of driving. And so the folks at ECT this year were talking about like the drivers who have transitioned onto the electric vehicles like their jobs a lot better. They don't smell like gas all the time. They have a vehicle that's more enjoyable to drive because it's not vibrating. 8 hours in a vibrating vehicle, like you feel kind of buzzed out a little bit. And you have a vehicle that is just more fun to drive. It's just got more pep to it. Even I've driven an electric bus. Like it's just got more pep to it. Not to say that it's fun, but like it's better than what we had before. So like there's all these benefits to the people who are breathing the air where these vehicles are going, to the drivers who are driving them, to even like the everyday commercial driver, retail drivers like you and me, like it's just better to essentially have these vehicles. And so that long term of like everyone experiencing those benefits is where we get to.
I very much am looking forward to that future. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And certainly, one of the things that I love most about this industry is the collaboration where just about everybody that I've had on the podcast, I view almost like a comrade in arms against the status quo, where very much it's a shared mission. And it's such an honor to be able to do what I'm doing and to have people like you join me to discuss these things that are very important, that do need to be shared. And so I want to thank you for taking an hour or so out of your time to come on and have a conversation. And for me, I'm feeling really jazzed and energized. So I'm looking forward to things, and I hope that I hope we're successful. I know we'll be successful, actually.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we'll be successful too. And yes, it was a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you for having me.
I really hope you've enjoyed this podcast and want to thank you so much for being here. If you haven't left a review or rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I'd really appreciate it. And if you have any feedback for the show, questions for me, or just want to reach out and say hi, you can email me at hello@ev-resource.com. The EV Resource Podcast is a production of EvoSpark Media Group and is supported by viewers and listeners just like you. Supporters of EV Resource on Patreon include at the director tier, Rajeev, Narayan, and Andy Cooper; at the executive producer tier, Christopher Lawrence and Dave Laansma; and at the producer tier, Eric Weber and Tony Stuntz. To get ad-free episodes of the podcast, free EV Resource merchandise, support recognition, and to join in the community discussion, you can head over to patreon.com/EVResource. I've been your host, Zach Hurst. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time.